Well, good afternoon. Thanks very much to all of you for coming today to hear our three newest Eastern Fellows talk about their careers, their time at Eastern, and their advice for you. I'm Rhona Free. I'm the Provost here at Eastern, and it's wonderful to see some of our most successful alumni come back to campus and provide an opportunity, especially for students, to develop a picture in your mind of what you might look like and what you might have accomplished in 10, 20, or 30 years from now. So I'm going to provide just very brief introductions of the three fellows, and they're going to provide a summary for you of their careers and then answer a set of questions that they were given ahead of time. So I'm going to read you the set of questions. They were asked to discuss their career path after graduating from Eastern, mention any mentors from Eastern who played significant roles in their career and success, discuss a little bit the benefit of their experience here where the focus was on learning to think critically and write skillfully, review what they feel are the current challenges and opportunities for graduates looking for work in these fields, and then to share one piece of career advice that they wish they had received before they left college to look for work. So what we'll do is I will give you their names, then they'll provide a summary, and then we'll have time afterwards for questions and answers. So while they're speaking, if you think of questions, write them down so that you don't forget them when it comes time to ask the questions. So let me introduce from left to right Michael Johnson, who graduated in 1997, Brian Bohling, who graduated in 1983, and David Whitehead, who graduated in 1984. So we'll begin with Michael. Mike, please go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Michael Johnson, and I'm an oral maxillofacial surgeon in Connecticut. I work in New Haven County. I work both at the Yale New Haven Hospital, and I also work in a private practice. And I'm also the residency program director at Yale New Haven Hospital for oral and maxillofacial surgery residency training program. So that's who I am, and I do have to say it's been a while since I've been on campus, and if you dropped me in the center of campus and didn't tell me I was here, I wouldn't know I was here. It's changed quite a bit, and absolutely one of the prettiest campuses that I've seen. Really terrific facilities.
Hi, my name is Brian Bohling. I'm the old guy. I was 1983, but Blarney's was still here when I was there, so that's something we can all relate to. My career started in human resources, and I started actually from a professor in my last exam who tapped me on the shoulder and made me a job offer, who happened to be the head of HR of Zare Corporation, which at the time owned TJ Maxx and Hit or Miss. I worked for Jack Welch for over 10 years, ran HR globally for Hess Oil, ran HR globally for Trane Air Conditioning, and ran half of HR for Campbell Soup. So I've been in businesses from guidance missile systems to chicken noodle soup, and I can tell you chicken noodle soup makes more money than guidance missile systems. So I've had a great, and then I started my own business in 2010. So I'm an executive coach and a headhunter. I've had the privilege of working right now with the president and CEO of Tishman Construction, who just built tower number 1, and now they're building tower number 2. I've coached the CEO of Kraft, the 2 highest ranking women in Kraft and Kellogg's. So I have my own business where I've basically taken 30 years of what I learned from other people and try to practice it on my own, and I'm enjoying it very much and look forward to meeting and talking with the rest of you.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Dave Whitehead, and Brian thinks he's the oldest person up here. I graduated in 84, but should have graduated in 82. Which will tell you a little bit about my career beginnings. I actually started my professional career before I graduated. I went to work for the family mill down in southeastern Connecticut, better known as General Dynamics Electric Boat Division, in 1981 in their contracts labor relations department. Had met a very important person in my life here at Eastern who became my friend, my best friend, then my spouse, and now the mother of 5, grandmother of 2 and 2/3. We decided to get married between our junior and senior years. So if you're thinking about, the non-traditional path to this process and to success, that's certainly what we took in that process. So I worked for General Dynamics Electric Boat Division for 9 years. I've had 3 career lives, which I'll talk a little bit about. And in that process, really began at the lowest rung of the ladder in human resources, working my way up to be, and at that day, in those days we didn't call it human resources, we called it personnel or industrial relations, and worked my way up to be the supervisor of personnel for about 25,000 employees at Electric Boat. Changed careers in 1989, went to work for the Gannett companies, which you may not know are the owners of USA Today and about 100 different media outlets, both in the United States and in Great Britain. And in that process, joined them as a human resources professional to build what I call a plug-and-play model to be disseminated across their various media outlets. They really didn't have, they had a centralized human resources function, but not a corporate-wide human resources function. And worked my way up to be president and publisher of a number of their community newspapers. I've lived in Eastern Connecticut, primarily Norwich, for most of my years, with the exception of 3 when I was with Gannett that we went to Ohio, but then returned to be president and publisher of the Norwich Bulletin. And after 3 years of doing that, got the crazy idea that healthcare looked like a really good career path and a really good industry to get into, and joined Bacchus Hospital down in Norwich in 1999 as the vice president of its corporate entity, and then worked my way up to a VP of strategic planning, and then became president and CEO of Bacchus Hospital in, I can't remember, 2009. And then most recently, we just affiliated about 18 months ago with Hartford Healthcare. And in that affiliation, I now have the opportunity and privilege to also be the president and CEO of Windham Hospital, and all of the entities and health services that are provided throughout New London County and Windham County and Tolland County, both pre-acute, acute, and post-acute services for that. And so that's kind of the career path that I've taken on.
Okay. Well, thank you. Now, if we can go to some of the specific questions, and if you feel like you have something particularly interesting or compelling to tell, please just chime in. So one of the questions that you were asked to think about is whether you had any mentors here at Eastern who played a significant role in your career or success.
Well, yes. It's hard to single out individuals, but, and I see Dr. Koenig is here, Dr. Booth, anybody else from the biology department here, but I was fortunate enough to be part of a department that I thought was exceptional. And, when I think back on it, I can't imagine getting a better education anywhere else. The faculty were accessible. They were enthusiastic, collegial with each other. Anything you could possibly imagine. And looking back on it, this was, now 20 years now. It's, that's not how a lot of departments in larger institutions run. In fact, I think they used to share who was chairman or chairperson, because, that was sort of an interesting approach. Where in some institutions, being a chairman is a competitive, position. So it was really a great experience. So to answer that question, I think I'd have to say all the faculty in the department, the biology department, in addition to, and I think he's still here, Father Larry. I don't know if he's here today, but he was, terrific in terms of being a mentor and a role model, and providing food to hungry students, and Sunday nights, Thursday night pasta. I don't know if he did.
Thursday night
Yeah,
pasta?
Thursday night pasta. Do they still do? Is he still doing Thursday night pasta?
Still doing that?
So
Good pasta.
Yeah. He actually married my wife and I, who actually we met here. David.
And he married my wife and I.
Yep. So and you know, it was great to have him take time out of his schedule to come out and you know and be the priest for our wedding. So you know, in terms of significant roles, I think you know just the faculty. I think the faculty are the most important contributors to successful learning. Facilities are great. It's wonderful to have facilities, but I think having the people, the mentors, and the guide, you know, people who guide you through your learning and teach you about in biology it was the scientific method and some of the details of you know biology and the various courses. I think that's critical. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
For me, it was a couple of folks. So it wasn't one individual, but Bruno Czech, who obviously gave me my first job offer, he came down here at nights and taught just on Tuesday and Thursday nights. And he was a senior vice president, so he did it because his son came here, so he was giving back. And so he obviously was a big influence. Lyle Yorks, who is now a professor at Columbia and teaches grad school at Columbia, he was my business advisor. So when I was a sophomore and junior and kind of, you know, going down the wrong side of the tracks, he would bring me back in the right side of the tracks and kind of make sure I was doing all the right things and kind of holding me accountable. So I looked up to him a lot. Dr. Parzik was one that none of us wanted to cross, but he was a tough economics, but I enjoyed his classes and Dr. Lombard so much that I minored in economics. So once I took their classes, I stuck with them for 3 or 4 years because I felt like I learned a lot from them. So I had a very similar experience. I had a different group of professors, but I had professors that I had access to all the time. I could call them on, they didn't have cell phones at the time, but I could call them at their homes. I could always go into their offices, and I could call Bruno at his office in Framingham, Massachusetts, and he would pick up the phone and say, hey, what's up? How can I help you? And I think that's a unique thing that that Eastern provides in terms of your education is there's not a lot of schools that offer that and can deliver that. And we were fortunate enough, at least in our cases, that we were able to have that dialogue and that kind of friendship with some key professors that, you know, helped us move along.
So, Brian, before we go on to David, can I ask you, what do you think, without putting you in a position where you have to boast about yourself, what do you think it was about you and what you did here that made them take such an interest in you?
You know, I was a kid that had no money, so I came here really hungry to be successful, but I just had no idea what it looked like. But I paid for 100% of my education. I was an RA, so I could get free housing, but I was also a bookie. So I was a bookie down at the high rise and low rise, so I made about $60, $80. I knew every Patriots fan and every Jet fan, and I knew when to take those bets. So I was an economics major, and I made good money when I.
And he still owes me money.
And yeah, now you owe me money. That's when I called the guys from Bridgeport, and they came and took care of guys like him. But now, anyway. But no, you know, I wanted to be successful and driven, and I came from a family lifestyle where I had to go for everything myself, and I knew that, and so I was just really determined to, you know, get out there and try to beat the odds. And these folks, I think Bruno saw that in me and said, I'm going to take a chance on this kid, and he took a chance. But I think that was it.
Okay, well, now I'm not sure I should have asked that question of you, but that's okay. David?
Yeah, we're bearing our souls a little bit here. A similar story, but I'll take a little bit different tact. Dr. Parzik, you know, I was a poli-sci major when I first came here and thought I was going to go into politics until I was resoundingly defeated in a mock election that was held at Wyndham High School through one of the political science courses that I took here. And I decided that I needed to get an economics class to fill out, you know, one of my requirements. So I'd heard all of these stories about Dr. Parzik, that he was really tough and he was brutal and, you know, it's the hardest exam you're ever going to take. And I took his class, and I just absolutely fell in love with economics. I fell in love with the whole concept of business. And I think to a certain degree, he had a group of people that he saw, to your question, that really wanted to put forth effort. And he kind of put his arms around that group, and he kind of guided them through a process. The other person that was here that maybe some folks in the audience will remember this name was a lady by the name of Peg Wilson. And Peg was an assistant to the president. She did a lot of work here in terms of the childhood development program. I think part of the program is named for her at this point in time. She was a Norwich native, so I'm from Norwich. And she took a very particular interest in Eastern students that came from Norwich, from Norwich Free Academy, to attend school here. And I would tell you, I was a commuter for my first, so we're really bearing our soul here. I was a commuter for my first semester and then made the transition after I had saved up enough money from working at Clark's, which was a restaurant downtown, washing dishes Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, to move on to campus. And that was an interesting transformation and transition for me. To put it bluntly, I became somewhat of a knucklehead in that process. And the late 70s, early 80s were a different time than they are today. And I'll never forget this. I did not perform very well through the midterms. And then Mrs. Wilson, who later became a great friend and mentor in terms of my community volunteerism back in Norwich and the surrounding communities, called me into her office and basically said, "You've got one shot at this." And she said, "I'm not going to let you fail." And I could have flunked out that second semester easily. And that was a life-changing moment for me. And for the entire time I was here, she always checked in to make sure that I was on top of it. And I think that that's a key ingredient. Sometimes mentors just happen to fall to you. I would say be a little bit more proactive and look for the mentors that are here on campus and try to create that relationship, because it not only will help you here, but it becomes a relationship that you take throughout your entire life.
All right. So our students now complete what's called a liberal arts core. When you were here, they were called general education requirements. And those courses focus on exposing students to knowledge in a number of disciplines, but their focus is really on developing critical thinking skills and communication skills. But I think students sometimes question the value of those courses. So could you talk a little bit about the extent to which those skills have been important in your success relative to content-based knowledge that you may have acquired here?
Start. Absolutely. I think being well-rounded is critical. And if your interest is in computer science and you're great at sitting in front of a computer and doing creating algorithms or whatever the computer scientists do, I mean, that's great. But having a broader perspective on other disciplines and having just that knowledge base in other disciplines is going to help you even further, because you have to interact with other people. If you're a science major, you have to interact with, whether you like it or not, MBAs and businessmen and use psychology on people that you interact with. Your writing skills are critical. Nobody's going to take you serious if you can't write. That's important. Speaking, public speaking is also very important. You have to be able to get in front of people and articulate and get your thoughts across to them so that it's effective. And that's something that I think, having a liberal arts education focuses on. If you're not good at math, you have to sort of be to really get to high levels. So you have to figure it out. And I think, there's different levels of learning how to get through math and different ways to look at it. You don't have to take calculus 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can take other courses. I'm sure Eastern offers courses that are more for the the right brain thinkers. In terms of yes, I was more geared towards science and just logical thinking and structure, but use that to your advantage. You really have to have a good understanding of every discipline, and just being an effective communicator and knowing when to stop talking. So.
Brian?
Yeah, I think the critical thinking in your folks' case, which was a little different than ours, is due to the media that you have in front of you, when you make a mistake, it can be put on viral immediately. When we made a mistake, we had time to adjust, and no one now has time to adjust. So if there's a lack of judgment on anybody, it's taken down in this world in the last 6 months. CEOs, politicians, you name it, people that have run the military, because they did one thing and someone took a snapshot and it went viral, and now they're sitting there holding the bag with whatever they did. And my counsel to you is, in our world of technology, that's not going to go away, but you have to be pretty self-aware of yourselves. So whatever you have out there, you'd want your grandmother or grandfather to be able to see it and you be okay with it. So the thing I'd say is, one, self-awareness is a very key thing to think through, and it used to be something that we had time to figure out our mistakes. The other thing I'll say is, due to the complexity of the world, your critical thinking on how you can take very complex things and boil it down into simple terms so people can move quickly is a really valuable skill set. So in human resources, there's always a lot of complexity, emotion, organizational culture. I look for people that can look at all that and say, you know what, we have these 3 issues that we're really facing. It's bam, 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 and if we do these 3 things, we can move the needle on these 3 issues. So I look for people that can take all the complexity, boil the ocean, crystallize it, and nail it on what we need to do. And I think if you practice that in whatever you decide to do, you'll be a really much more effective communicator, and you'll also have people seeking you out because you're very good at that skill set.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, around the issue of critical thinking and what I'll call skillful writing is a body of analytics. Today, and I wish we had had more of that when I was here. I've had to learn throughout my career how to become a more critical thinker and a better writer. And it takes practice. It's practice, practice, practice. It's just not what you're going to learn in your time here at Eastern. But it's the body of analytics. And today, regardless of what industry any of us might be in, this is the growing new profession. And it really goes to this issue of how do we think critically and problem solve and then articulate what we believe is a resolution to that particular issue. And it's the use of data and really boiling down the data into something that can be articulated as a plan to move forward. And that is something that, when I look for, really talented people to come into our organization at any level, it's what's their ability to analyze and articulate based upon what they say. And really provide a situational assessment, provide background, do a full assessment, and then provide the recommendation. We call it SBAR in our industry. But that I would say is the thing that I think is most important, especially given the fast-paced change that we're seeing both across the economy but in our daily lives.
So, David, what do you think has been most critical in your ability to shift from industry to industry? What skill was that?
Leadership. I really think that the ability to develop yourself as a leader, which is something else that takes continual education, learning, and practice, is be able to shift across 3 different industries and maintain a level and expand a level of leadership in that. It really comes back to leadership. And leadership, in its basic component, is the ability to recognize a vision for any organization and then to create a value set and then to demonstrate those values continually so that other people within the organization experience it. But in order to do that, you have to think critically, you have to be able to write, and you have to be able to articulate very, very well.
And if you don't mind me adding to that, I agree with everything he has to say. I think leadership is very important. And one of, at least what I've found, is a good leader and a very effective leader is one who can make those around him or her better. So I've been around leaders where they're afraid of the people around them, rising above them, and that to me is ineffective. I think being one who's not afraid of that, and somebody who can make the people surrounding you better, is important.
That's a great point. I guarantee you, if you were at my executive leadership team meeting, I am not the smartest person at the table. I got really, really smart people. I mean, physicians, PhDs, advanced nurse practitioners who sit there, who lead various segments of our operations. But the ability to lead them is critical. So, I would say as you think forward, think about that and really focus on that and build that skill set. It's incredibly important.
Can you each spend a few minutes now talking about how a college student would actually go about getting into your industry? What is the path that they have to take to get there now, and what particular challenges and opportunities do you see in that industry?
Okay, well, just in general, I'll talk about healthcare. So, it's competitive. You have to do well, get the best grades, get good recommendations, expose yourself to whatever it may be that you're interested in. When I look at applications for our residency program, I want to make sure that the person who is applying actually knows what they're getting themselves into. So if you want to be a veterinarian, or if you want to be a dentist or a physician or surgeon, nurse, how do you know you want to be that? Do you have any experiences? Did you volunteer at a local hospital? Did you go on a mission trip and work with people? So that's important. Just surrounding yourself with that, with experiences that prove that you've been thoughtful in your decision, and that it's not something that you're going to get halfway through and then give up. So that's important. I think when you look at medical schools, dental schools, veterinary schools, they look at that. They want somebody who's serious, who is going to show up, ready to work hard, prove that they can get the grades, they can do well, pass the board exams. That's a biggie. Every medical field has requirements for licensure, which includes being able to pass an exam. So you may know the information, but can you take an exam and get the minimum grade that you have to get to pass it? And some licenses require like an oral exam as well, being able to pass an oral and written exam. What else? Oh, limitations. Unfortunately, I think tuition is getting a little out of hand. I know some medical schools, and I think it was you that mentioned your daughter's veterinary school. I mean, upwards of $100,000 a year to go to school. So if you do the math and you add, your undergraduate, potentially your undergraduate loans, I mean, you're looking at somebody who's a physician or a dentist or a veterinarian who day one after they graduate, they're $500,000 in debt, which is kind of concerning if you're a patient, because you're going to be wondering, this doctor has to pay this off. Could there be conflict of interest here in trying to, trust someone? So that could be an issue, and so that's a concern. I don't know I don't think there's a way to fix that. I think that tuition is going up because of the economy and the resources that are required to train doctors and veterinarians and dentists. But my advice to you would be to, if you are interested in a health field, whether it's dentistry or medicine or veterinary medicine, make sure it's what you really want to do, and then do what you have to do to ensure that, And by doing that, you'll prove to whoever it may be that you have to prove this to that you've done your homework, and do your best. Get the best grades you can, because even if you don't go into medical school or dental school or veterinary school, you'll still have those great grades to show that you've worked hard, and that will help you get into whatever it may be that you want to get into. And what this also means is, maximize the resources that are available to you. I'm a big believer. Whenever, anywhere I went to school, whether it was here or the University of Pittsburgh or even at Yale now, whatever resources are available, maximize it, use them. When I was here at Eastern, we had a planetarium, we had great faculty, we had labs that were available for undergraduate use. We had a I'm not forgetting about the yes, where you keep the plants there. But we had tremendous resources. We went on trips to Bermuda. And, we had an anatomy lab. We had all these great resources for learning. And, and just being able to recognize that and use it to your advantage while you're here, I think, is important. You have a great library. I think a university has to have a great library if it has great faculty and students. So maximizing your resources is important.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Brian.
Yeah, I would say in terms of going out into the market in human resources or anything else, employers are going to expect, because you have access to the internet means you have access to information. So employers are going to expect that you've done your homework on that company. So if you get asked a softball question like, what do we make and what's our revenue, and you don't know the answer to that during an interview, you're probably going to be pretty short-lived on the next steps in terms of the interview process. So for as much as you may study for a hard exam, I would counsel all of you that the opportunity you have is you can go and get a lot of access, particularly on publicly traded companies, on their culture, their finances, what they pay their top dogs and their proxy. But you can do a lot. You can make yourself, differentiate yourself in an interview where you've walked in and you've done your homework. And whoever you're talking to or whatever organization you're talking to, they pick up right away that you've done your homework. And you know what that means to them? You really want to be there. And they want to hire not only people that have done their homework, but at the end of the day, companies are very proud of who they are. They want to hire people who want to be there. And so it's also the due diligence. But then I would also suggest to you, don't go into a job interview half-assed. Go for it. Either put the throttle down and give it 110%, or don't go in there, because somebody behind you that's going in next is going to give 110%. So give it everything you have. Study as much as you can. Learn from others that maybe have been in those roles that you can talk to. Be a sponge in terms of information. And then finally, be yourself. I mean, I've been doing human resources for 32 years. I've got to work under some great CEOs like Jack Welch and other. And here's what I'll tell you. People that like what they do are really good at it. And people that do what they do because they have to get a paycheck are okay at it. So if you can find something that you really like what you do, you're going to be really good at it. And guess what? People are going to notice you're really good at it. So my counsel to you is go find that, do your homework, have your A game ready to go. When you're in that interview, go for it, and show, if you really do feel this way, that it's something that you really love and you really want to go do.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, so I would, on the other side of healthcare, this will be my plug for the non-clinical healthcare career. I think right now the greatest challenge is just the incredible pace of change in terms of the payment reform that's going on, both nationally and locally. And when you look at my industry, 60% of our revenue stream comes from the government. So they're not very open to negotiation on pricing and rates. And 40% is reliant upon the commercial managed care market. So we're also, under new requirements to reduce cost. So when you put those two variables together, the entry into healthcare administration or what I would say the business technical side of healthcare, we're streamlining. We're looking for ways to reduce cost. And when 60% of your cost base is people, because we're a very people-oriented industry, you look to people. So the competitive barometer raises in healthcare for the talent equation. And what I would say, based on everything else you've already heard, is demonstrated discretionary effort. At the end of the day, I was asked this morning at the 11 o'clock session, if there's a stack of resumes on the table and we're looking to hire someone and grades are the same, background's the same, and everything else, at the end of the day, the one thing that moves that from paper to the person is, do they have a track record of discretionary effort? And the best way you can do that is through volunteerism. Volunteerism here on campus, volunteerism in the community. How do you spend your extra time? If it's in front of an Xbox, that'd be great. You could show me a few things so I could learn how to use one. But at the end of the day, we're going to look at discretionary effort, and that becomes the talent differentiator as we go forward.
Okay, last piece of advice you would give. Anything that you haven't already provided?
I would. There's two things, and this will sound a little. This is a leadership behavior that I've had to develop over my career. I would tell you to find your mirror and use it often. Sometimes I think we're our own worst enemies when we're in our professional lives and in our career development. So I always say to folks that join our organization, learn how to use this. This is your mirror. And take time out to look in your own mirror and ask yourself, be self-aware. Ask yourself, how are you performing? What am I doing to contribute to the team, to the organization, to the values and vision of this organization? And through that process, you have to be what I call be in the moment. You can't be on autopilot. You have to constantly be in the moment. And my analogy to that is the honeybee. So I use this when I do new employee orientation. I use this analogy, and it's about the honeybee. And if you know anything about honeybees, honeybees are supposed to go to clover. They're supposed to be working on the end product, which is the honey and the honeycomb. But honeybees get addicted to pollen. So the best honeybees stay focused in the moment on what the end product is. The not so well-performing honeybees tend to run for the quick hit. And they tend to go into an autopilot mode and say, oh, the pollen's over there, I'm going to go get the pollen. Now, for the scientists in the room, I probably just messed that whole thing up, but it's the one I use because I'm not a scientist. But they're going to go for the quick hit. And it, I would just say to you, look at what the end point is and what you're trying to accomplish in whatever career you choose, whatever organization you work for. Recognize that you have to be in that moment and not fall into an autopilot mode.
I guess my advice or kind of advice to you would be, we all went to Eastern and we made it, which means you can make it. So I wouldn't be intimidated by anything out there that you're facing. When I worked at GE, I worked around a table of a lot of folks from Dartmouth and Yale and Cornell and Yale and Dartmouth and on. And I was a hardworking guy from Eastern. And I wasn't going to let those guys beat me. And I think that, whatever you decide to do to go out there, be proud that you're from here and give it everything you got. And don't be ashamed of that, because there are people sitting around this room that sat in your chairs, me over 30 years ago, and was wondering the same things that you're probably wondering right now. And I had people sitting at this end, the Bruno Czechs of the world, saying, kid, go give it everything you got. Because you can take these guys. You may have to outwork them. You may have to stay longer, but you can take them. And I hope that if you get any message out of today, I hope you know that you can go out there and do whatever you want to do.
I absolutely agree with that. When I look at applications, where they went to school is is relevant, but it's how well they performed at that school and what they've achieved. So you can achieve a lot here, and you can do very well here, and use that to your advantage. Some advice that I can give. Well, the first is, and they don't teach you this until you get into more of these roles, or you don't learn this until you get into these roles, which is perception is reality. And what people think of you is unfortunately how you're judged. When you go to your doctors, if your doctor has a horrific bedside manner, he or she is probably a bad doctor. But he or she may be a great doctor, may be very smart, may be very analytical, may have published in some of the finest journals and done well at every Ivy League school, but if they can't effectively communicate, a lot of patients who are, just regular people, they perceive that as well, he's not a very good doctor, or she's not a very good doctor. So, my advice would be, pay attention to kind of pay attention to what people think of you. I think that's important. Most of us, it doesn't, it just happens naturally. If you're a good person, you don't have to act, but that's important. And the other piece of advice would be, we tend to flock towards what makes us comfortable. Like when I was here, I just sort of flocked towards like the sciences. And when I had elective, the ability to take an elective, I would take a science elective. When I think back on it, I wish I had taken a few business courses. Because I think I would have been better prepared for some of the things that I had to deal with. And the reason why I didn't take business courses was because I kind of wasn't good at it. It just didn't have an interest in it, and I wish I had. So if you have fears, like say you're the opposite, say you don't like science, take a science course, learn about objective thinking and the scientific method and so forth, and really embrace it. And I think that'll make you a better whatever you want to be when you get older. Something that I sort of live by is, I live by these, balance. I think it's important to have balance in your life. When you're in school, you tend to, focus on studies, but it's important to, to have the balance, have the friends, have the relationships. They're building a beautiful fine arts center, here, and take time out of class and enjoy the other things that exist. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we have time for questions. Questions, anyone? Yes.
I know after listening to all you guys that you're very successful in attending Eastern now. Sometimes it gets very stressful and hard. I know no majors are walking far from what you do. But what did you guys do to stay motivated throughout your time at Eastern or your job that you had or graduate school? Because I know I'm going to graduate school. Now that I'm more than halfway through here at Eastern, I know that I have 3 years of graduate school. Have you not stopped? So how do you guys, can you guys stay motivated?
Keep your eye on what your goal is. Think about how happy you'll be when you get there. It's stressful, but it's, to me it was a good stress. I enjoyed every minute of learning. So yeah, it's stressful, but if you really enjoy it, you truly like what you're doing, I think it's you can get through it. But just keeping things in perspective, seeing the big picture, where you'll end up, and achieving your goals, I think is my advice to you. Just keep looking ahead, and thinking about how great it'll be when you finally get there. In the grand scheme of life, I mean, you're probably going to live 100 years. The 7 years of education is a drop in the bucket. So, and it'll be well worth it.
Brian or David, any tips on motivation?
I think it's a really great question. What's your major? Biology. It's a really great question. For me, it was always, if I think about my 3 careers, the first one was about honing my skills. So, my motivation was, first was to finish my schooling and graduate, but then to really hone my skills in the human resources field of business administration. And then in my second career was really getting into journalism and publishing, because I saw that as a way to make a difference in the community. And my transition to healthcare, I got really, really involved in my leadership while I was in the publishing realms on a number of different community organizations, United Way, Chambers of Commerce, community action agencies, and had varying leadership roles in each of those from a volunteerism perspective, and recognized that the fabric of our community relies so much on healthcare that I saw that as the next big motivational piece, that I wanted to get into healthcare because I thought that's where you could really help people, but I could do it based on the skill set that I had already developed. So I think as you go forward, keep looking for those things that motivate you first and foremost, and then build those into your career path.
Other questions? Yes.
How did you deal with the stress of courses such as organic chemistry?
Oh. So we have a common theme here. Well, I will have to admit that I don't know who teaches organic chemistry now. Okay. See, Dr. Wright was my teacher, and he made it, it was almost frustrating how easy he made it look when he taught it. And then when you go to sit down and actually learn it, you're like, wow, this is so much harder than he just tried to teach. What you do is you just put your head down and you grunt it out. I mean, you just work it out. But try to convince yourself that it's interesting. It makes it a little easier. You try to, keep telling yourself, oh, this is really fascinating. And then you can get yourself through it. Again, access. I'm sure this individual has office hours. What I would do when I had issues with organic, I remember was tough, but Dr. Wright was always, his door was always open, and whenever I had an issue, you just go to his office and he would give you like a curbside lecture on whatever that topic was, and that's one of the great things about Eastern was, when there was something that was unclear, I never once felt like there was no accessibility to the faculty, but dealing with the stress, I think try to convince yourself that it's interesting, and then hammer through it.
Other questions? Yes.
How did you guys decide what you wanted to do? Like, did you have a set path, or did it kind of fall into place and you worked your way?
From a major perspective or from a career perspective? Both. So I said earlier, I started out as a poli-sci major here, and recognized that that was probably not going to put a lot of food on the table for what became a family of 7 over that period of time. So and it was taking, just by whim of taking that course with Dr. Parzik on macroeconomics, that I fell in love with it. I mean, quite honestly, I had no intention of going in the business route. I took that one course, and I grew a deep appreciation for him and the way that he taught. But then the subject matter really grabbed a hold, and from there it was, all the finance, accounting, economics, human resources, even a little psychology sprinkled in there that I could get my hands on to move in that direction.
Yeah, I think for me, it was a couple of things. In May 1983, the unemployment rate here was 10.1%. So a lot of us were looking at each other like, what are we going to do? I would have probably taken a job in anything that would have offered me a job, and it just happened to be that Bruno Czech offered me a job in human resources, and I only got that because he taught here, and I jumped all over it. And then I started to learn the trade and learn human resources and decided I liked it, and then I continued to go in it. But the only master plan that I had when I left here was that hearing my father whisper in my ear, "Get a job." And I got one, and I went. But I didn't have any insight into where it was going to go. I just knew I had to be at Framingham, Massachusetts on Monday after I graduated at 8 o'clock a.m., and I went. But I learned from there and then learned how I appreciated HR and then continued in it. But there was no roadmap in the beginning to say, here's where we're going, and it's crystal clear, and that did not exist.
So, Brian, just because you can reiterate this notion that students have to be ready to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. You gave us some of the information about how you got your first job, but can you give us the whole story?
Yeah, so here's the whole story of how I really got it. So I'm in the middle of my final exam here at Eastern, and I get tapped on the shoulder in the middle of the exam from Bruno Czech, from the professor. And I'm like, oh, boy, I must have got caught cheating or something. So he said, come here, I want you to, and this is in the middle of the exam. So I'm like, I'm in deep yogurt right now. So I go out to the hallway, and he says to me, I'm going to develop a training program in HR, and I'm going to offer you a job. And I'm like, great. What is it? I'll tell you what it is when you show up. Okay. What am I going to get paid? I'll tell you that, what that is when you show up. So when do you graduate? I said I graduate on May 23rd on a Saturday. I expect you at 8 a.m. in Framingham, Massachusetts on May 25th. Now, I was a senior. I wanted the summer off and, have some fun, right? Not happening. So he basically said, you show up at 8 o'clock on the 25th, and I will hire you. Or you don't show up at 8 o'clock, and I will not hire you. So I go home, and I was an RA, and I lived in Aquadors, and we didn't have cell phones, so we had to go and dial the old phone. I dialed the phone, and I called my dad. And I said, Dad, I have and he said, stop right there, take it. I said, Dad, I haven't got finished time. I don't care what it is, where it is, and how much money you're making. Take the job. So I said, Dad, can I talk to Mom? He says, yeah. He puts my mother on the phone. She says, listen to your father. That's exactly what happened. So there was no take the job, and I literally got the job in the middle of my final exam here at Eastern. And I went there, and I was there at 7:45 on Monday morning in Framingham, Massachusetts.
Is there still a volunteer requirement here?
It's not a requirement any longer, no.
Because that, I guess, would explain how I chose my career path. Back in the day, there was a requirement that you had to volunteer, which I'm sure, those opportunities are available. But I just found myself volunteering at the hospital at UConn Health Center, and found my way to the operating room somehow, and watching these surgeons reconstruct somebody's face, and I said, boy, that's really amazing. And I said, who are those guys? And they said, oh, they're oral surgeons. And I'm like, oh, I thought they just took out wisdom teeth and took out did dental extractions. They're like, no, they reconstruct people's faces, for orthognathic purposes and do other cool surgeries. And so it just sort of got me thinking about that field. And before you knew it, I was applying to dental school because that was the pathway to get to that point. And even if I didn't get to that point, I would have been happy doing dentistry or orthodontics or something. But it was just some random. It was a random experience that just sparked an interest. Otherwise, I probably would have wanted to teach.
That would have been good too. Yeah. Other questions? Amy.
I was wondering if you could talk about organic chemistry. I'm sure everybody had this one course that they just couldn't stand or couldn't understand. What did you guys do as far as learning outside the classroom? What sort of techniques did you employ? Were you just expected to go to a lecture and you looked and you learned, or how did you tackle those really challenges?
Yeah, mine was philosophy. I really struggled. There was a core requirement that you had to take philosophy, and I don't know, my brain just wasn't working that way at that point in time. And, my technique was, if I rewrite things, then, even from class notes, and then go basically format it. I had a special format that I used. But if I rewrote things, then it started to click with me. It wasn't so much, going through the book. It was really what happened in class from a lecture component, and then basically taking that initial information. And then, again, this goes back to critical thinking and writing skills. And I really think this helped me in my writing aspect. But then kind of it gelled as I went through that process, putting it down on another piece of paper. And Blarney's and Italian Garden.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mine was Cobalt. And so what I did is we had, back in these days, at Eastern, we had to hit all these pieces of paper and hope that we hit them right, and then they'd fold it in, and it'd tell you whether you programmed correctly or not. And I got about 30 seconds through that class and said, this dog doesn't hunt. I'm not going to be able to do this. But I needed the requirement to graduate for business. So my little brother, who is now a CFO of one of Warren Buffett's companies, one of his younger friends went to school here. And I knew he was really good at IT and really good at Cobalt. So I went to Tom Nevins, and I can't tell you what I offered him, but anyway, I said, Tom, I need help here. So you're going to have to teach, this senior some new tricks, and he was a sophomore. So I made it worth his while, and he sat there through every assignment and walked me through how to think it, how to work it. And after about 2 or 3 assignments, I started to get the hang of it, but I was absolutely deer in the headlights when I went to that first meeting. So I went and got some help from somebody that knew it, and they helped me through it. And it was a younger classman.
Yeah, just withdraw and try again next semester. That's the
A few of those too.
We've all done that.
We've done that at the last minute. Pulled that ace.
You know what? In terms of tough classes, I think getting together with your classmates, talking it out, teaching each other. If you can teach something, then you obviously know it. So.
Okay, other questions? The woman behind Dr. Booth.
You guys talk a lot about mentors and what they are. Do you guys still keep in touch with mentors after Eastern, or status?
I keep in touch with, I had dinner with Lyle Yorks, so when I go into New York and he's teaching at Columbia and he can take a night to have dinner, I personally still do that, and every time I finish dinner, I thank him for being my professor. I think the power of networking is huge, and you can't underestimate it, because you just never know where that contact's going to come that may or may not be able to help you. So I don't think you can I don't think you can over network. So I think that the more that you do that, I can still call, although he's retired now, the head of HR of GE, who I worked for when he was 37 in Lynn, Massachusetts. I can call him at his West Palm Beach house right now on the cell phone, and he'll talk to me in 5 minutes. So I've made a point, though, to stay in touch with him. And he's made a point to stay in touch with me. But I think, like any relationship, when you're networking, it's a two-way street. So if people see that you want to stay involved with them, they'll have a tendency, right, to stay involved with you. If you kind of shy away from that, then I don't think you can expect a lot in return.
Yeah, I would say that from an Eastern perspective, I get to spend about, on average, 12 hours a day with one of my mentors that I mentioned earlier. So she makes sure that I'm pretty much on track and moving in the right direction. But I think to Brian's point, as you go through your career, you want to build those mentorship relationships. But I'd also say you want to become the mentor, because you will find that you get just as much value out of mentoring others as you get from those who have mentored you. And it's a great continual learning process as you go through that. I mean, I'm still in touch with mentors from both the publishing world and the defense industry, But I would say right now, probably the most critical mentors that I have are the people that I've mentored who are teaching me new things day in and day out. So look for that side of the relationship as well.
I agree. Whoever may become your mentor, absolutely stay in touch with them, because you're always wanting to bounce something off of them and get their advice. And as you take on new roles, you're going to need to find new mentors for those roles. And I've learned that with this new role that I'm in, I had to immediately find somebody that is in a similar role so I can bounce ideas off of them. So absolutely, mentors are critical.
Questions?
Hi, yeah. So in all your different levels of work and these businesses that you work for, how do you see levels of diversity, like things like gender, things like that? That's specific, or big.
I think in the business world today, there's been some progress, but I don't think as much progress as people like to think there's been. I would tell you that in the organizations that I've worked with, where there's been a more richness of diversity, that it's actually a better organization to work in, because it goes back to this issue of critical thinking. One of the things that diversity brings to the table, and there's all kinds of diversity, is that you get different perspectives. And those different perspectives, the way that I've looked at it on the teams that I've participated with, actually produce a better product in terms of the decision making in that process. So I think we're gaining on it, but I don't think from a business perspective, I don't think we've gone as far as we need to go in developing a more diverse, rich culture in the workplace.
Yeah, I think companies that are successful at it are companies that match the diversity that buys their products. So I always judge a company by saying, who are the people that are buying their products? What do they look like? And is the company that's making those products, that's selling it to those customers, do they look the same? And what you'll find is companies are always out of balance on that, because they usually have more diversified folks buying their products and less diversified folks making the products that those folks are buying, and you're constantly trying to balance that act. But I look at it as, at the end of the day, if you're selling something and you're not representing the people that you're selling it to, at some point in time it's going to come back and bite you.
In healthcare, in medical schools, dental schools, and I would assume veterinary schools, I think more than 50% of the student population is female. In terms of gender distribution, I mean, females are winning. In terms of like the field that I'm in, when I did my residency program, the program was it started in the 60s, and it took 1 or 2 residents per year. And out of 40 years, there was 1 female resident out of 40 plus years, and she's like a superstar because she was the only female resident. Since then, we've had 1 every other year. Surgery tends to be, for some reason, males tend to flock towards surgery, but that's not so true anymore. If you look at if I was to look at the general surgery residents, I mean, half of them are female. So there's definitely been a change in the gender distribution of doctors. Yeah.
Dr. Booth?
Yeah, the question for Dr. Johnson. For several years now, you've been one of the top docs voted by the Reader's Poll for Untitled magazine.
And it cost me a lot of money, by the way.
Aside from money, what is it that makes your patients vote you as one of the top picks?
Well, it's interesting. The patients don't vote for that. It's the doctors who vote for that. So, I guess, I'm a specialist, so the generalists send their patients to me. So if their patients are happy with me, they go back to the generalist, they tell the generalist that they're happy with me, and then they vote. So again, it's that whole perception is reality. I've convinced them that I've done a good job.
So what is the clue to turning out happy patients that can go back and...
Bedside manner, affability, availability, and ability. And in that order, I think. But yeah, good. It's just being available, I think, is important. And I can feel my phone buzzing as I'm sitting here. I think technology has been huge. I give patients my phone number, the ones that I have big surgery, the ones that I do large surgeries. I tend to give them my phone number. They can get a hold of me, because otherwise they have to go through this meandering path to get to me. So that's ultimately makes them happy that they have access to me, and that's what when you read the Connecticut magazine and some of the other magazines that put out polls is who are the best doctors. It's all about perception. It's like who they look at your abilities, but to get most doctors, when they get to finish, they're all good. They all have met their criteria for being a doctor. They've passed their board exams. They've gotten through licensure. It's the interaction you have with the patient. That's I think that's what differentiates one doctor from another.
Is that something you made a conscious decision in, or is it just you're acting?
Just me being because I care, and I listen to people, and I think people see that, so I think that's important. Yeah, when I go to the doctor, I learn a lot. When I go to the doctor, I look around, I see how people treat me, everybody from the nurses to the staff, and I think if you're thinking about going into healthcare, I think being a patient is probably one of the best learning experiences you can have. I don't think anybody would argue with that. So, I think it's important to and if you truly do care about patients, it shows. You can't fake that.
Question? Yes.
I know you talked a little bit about balance, but what would you say is your hardest or was your most worthwhile sacrifice in college?
I didn't sacrifice fun, I can tell you that. Did you sacrifice fun? I think just knowing that you next day, if you wasted a day, that you knew yourself you were going to fall behind, and you had to make it up, and you couldn't argue with that. So you get to a certain stage in your college career that that all the tricks that you've tried to pull, they're all coming short time, and graduation's coming, and there's certain requirements that need to be met and certain timetables that need to meet them, and you either go and meet them or you procrastinate them and pretend they're going to go away, and you wake up in the morning with a cold sweat realizing they haven't gone away. So one of the things that for me is I've come to realize that those things aren't ever going to go away, and I'm always going to have commitments, whatever they may be, to my kids, to my business, whatever, and I got to deliver. So what kept me going is looking in the mirror saying, you got to deliver on this one, so get out there and do what you have to do to deliver.
I'd say time. I think I look back at it now, and you make that transition from high school to college. High school's very structured, and your 8 hours is jam-packed. Maybe you have 5, 6, 7 minutes between classes to move from place to place. Maybe you get 20 minutes for lunch. You come to college, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I have all this time. So when I think back about what did I sacrifice during college was the use of time. That I really didn't take advantage of that, what I'll call time that could have been used more productively. I actually wish I'd gotten more involved in volunteering in the community level and on the campus level with some of that time, instead of doing more recreational fun things in and out of Willimantic. So that was probably a lesson learned. That you don't. It's a great question. You don't understand it until you're out of here for a while. But there's so much more that I could have taken advantage of, and I sacrificed that for other things.
Yeah, does Dr. Wynn still do the Special Olympics?
Mm-hmm. Yes, he does. Yeah, coming up in March.
Highly recommend that. That was a great way to de-stress, and you help people out. So volunteering, I think, is critical for your own self, feeling of self-worth, and also you help out the community.
All right, well, I think that's all the time that we have. So I've learned some important things. First of all, that you should take advantage of relationships that present themselves. So whether it was with Bruno Check or Peg Wilson or biology faculty, the relationships were all critical in our fellows developing their careers and their success. A second thing is to be proud of being an Eastern student and an Eastern graduate, that there's nothing to be intimidated about when you're sitting there next to people who have degrees from perhaps more prestigious institutions. Prestige doesn't purchase much. The third thing is to work hard, really hard, harder than others. Partly you have to do that because people from more prestigious institutions may have a little bit of a leg up on you, and so working hard can overcome that. Another point is to be self-aware, that idea of holding the mirror up in front of you so that you can see yourself as others do. And then finally, take advantage of the resources that are available to you, whether, again, they're individuals and a relationship that you can develop, or whether it's the planetarium or the opportunity to study in Belize, but take advantage of the opportunity. So this was a very helpful session for me. I'm sure it was for all of you. So please join me in thanking our new Eastern Fellows.